July 2022 news-wise was one of the wildest months in recent NASCAR memory and was anchored by Kyle Busch. JGR and Toyota, they find themselves in the 7th inning in the pursuit to lock down Kyle Busch. And this is after they blew a bases loading situation in the 3rd inning with Oracle, a massive sponsorship deal that fell through. While you can never say never, the St. Louis Cardinals in fact were down to their last strike twice in the 2011 World Series before David Freese came up clutch. The Cardinals ended up winning the World Series in 7 games. Toyota president Dave Wilson basically came out publicly and said that he's exploring an alternative to Kyle Busch. KFB himself admitted that he's talking to other teams and is open to taking a pay cut. Now there's even the rumor that Joe Gibbs, the guy that gave Kyle Busch his big break all the way back in 2008, the guy that changed his life and the trajectory of his career, he isn't even talking to him right now. It's incredible to think that Joe Gibbs Racing, out of all organizations, you gotta think they are right behind Hendrick Motorsports in terms of the money coming in terms of the star power, in terms of being competitive in the NASCAR Cup Series. It's that caliber of an organization that is struggling to keep their franchise driver, a 2-time champion who is the most valued driver in the NASCAR garage today. Which Kyle Busch has rightfully earned that label. Yes, you have guys like Tyler Reddick and Kyle Larson. You look at them, they have a lot of upswing. They're right before their prime, generational talents. Yet they are not established names and they do not have that sweet spot, that sweet sensation of having the talent and also having the veteran experience that organizations like Joe Gibbs Racing or even some of these smaller teams want. As Kyle Busch has that, he has the years of experience of building teams, of making them into championship contenders. Kyle Busch is that type of driver. Still, it looks like that skill level is going to be undervalued monetarily. All thanks to M&M's dumping NASCAR to focus on the important things in life, the important things in this society, like making the green M&M less attractive in the name of inclusion. A driver like Kyle Busch's pedigree having to race for less money says a lot about NASCAR and how much it has fallen compared to other sporting leagues as well as other motorsports when it comes to paying their superstars. NRF Productions proudly presents what Kyle Busch's contract crisis says about the state of NASCAR. Even as a young driver, we could tell that Kyle Busch, he was going to be a rebel. He was a black hat in training. Not only since he was the brother of the polarizing Kurt Busch, but he would attempt a truck race in a weekend sponsored by the major cigarette company Marlboro. At just the age of 16, he was banned by the Speedway and the cigarette company from participating in that given weekend. When he did get to compete, he wowed the NASCAR world as an 18-year-old by winning Busch Series races left and right and showing he was a unique talent and also a unique character just like his brother, just like good old Kurt Busch, who was making a lot of enemies on the Cup Series side. When Kyle Busch eventually followed the footsteps of his brother into the NASCAR Cup Series, he took the role of Terry Labonte and got Terry Labonte's salary. The only difference being that Kellogg's gave up the quarter panels to CarQuest as part of this new co-sponsorship model that was emerging in NASCAR, and we would see it come full circle, especially in the late 2000s. When Kyle Busch eventually took the checkered flag to win his first NASCAR Cup Series race, showing the might of Tony the Tiger, he would become the youngest winner in the NASCAR Cup Series at that time, before Joey Logano, of course, had a rise like no other. And he did so in a motorsport that was in the same conversation as the NFL. NASCAR was one of, if not the largest spectator sporting league in the world. It had record high television ratings and it had mainstream popularity. People knew who Jeff Gordon was. People knew who Tony Stewart was. Heck, Dale Earnhardt Jr. was on Rolling Stone magazines. He was in Wrangler commercials, a mainstream star for NASCAR. The explosiveness of stock car racing trickled down into the individual organizations, and because of that, you would see mid-pack teams even like Chip Ganassi Racing get sponsorship deals, full sponsorship deals from companies like Coors Light, Target, and Havoline. Sponsors not only wanted to have a slice of that NASCAR pie, but they wanted complete dominance in their industry when it comes to the NASCAR front. They wanted their product to be front and center over their rivals, leading to rivalries amongst the corporations themselves that went to massive extremes, such as Lowe's not allowing Tony Stewart gear to be sold in the Lowe's Motor Speedway gift shop, or Coca-Cola running 8 C2 paint schemes in the 2004 Pepsi 400 as a jab at Pepsi. Many teams in the motorsport were signing record-breaking contracts, and when you look at the Forbes list of the most valuable NASCAR teams from 2007, the average team was worth $120 million. Up an astounding 67%, a number unimaginable given the fact that NASCAR was already a motorsport consumed by millions every single Sunday, and to think that it could soar to even larger, even higher financial heights showcased the juggernaut that NASCAR was in the 2000s. This helped out Kyle Busch a ton, as he would have the magic only rivaled by Tinkerbell, especially as a driver with a personality hard to contain. Many companies didn't want a driver like Kyle Busch. They wanted their driver to have a clean-cut, family-friendly image, which led to him getting dumped by Kellogg's and Hendrick Motorsports, preferring the less talented but less of a PR nightmare Casey Mears and the marketing machine known as Dale Earnhardt Jr. TM. Despite that baggage, Kyle Busch had interest from multiple teams including Evernham, RCR, and DEI because they had full season sponsors that were willing to put up with the negative press. They were willing to put up with the personality of Kyle Busch if that meant a lot of screen time and a few trips to victory lane. Enter the Mars Corporation, as through its M&M's, Snickers, and Skittles brands, they had risen to the status of the official candy of NASCAR. Yet they were not getting the exposure they wanted with race teams like MB2 Motorsports and Robert Yates Racing, despite a successful 2004 season with Elliott Sadler. In the end, that would not be sustainable because Sadler and Robert Yates would collapse off the face of the earth in 2006. They got to the point as a company where at all costs they wanted to win. They didn't care about anything else. Kyle Busch was the driver that the Mars Corporation was looking for, and with their millions of dollars going to Joe Gibbs Racing, they fulfilled their appetite for winning in that 2008 season alone. A lot of Mars brands won that season, including M&M's, Snickers, and Combos, and ultimately they would also have some controversies that would get them in the limelight, including getting into it with Dale Earnhardt Jr. TM. I'll tell you, just rubbing it up with the most popular driver, that can get you a lot of people talking about your company. Maybe not so much in a good way, but that is what Mars wanted. M&M's had the embodiment of an old school sponsor. They wanted to win races, though this would be something that would become less and less over the next decade, especially as there was a growing tide in the corporate world around that time, around the late 2000s, that could not be ignored. The United States and the world suffered with the 2008 financial crisis thanks to low interest rates and insufficient regulation of the housing market. The United States ended up becoming a bear market for the next year and a half. NASCAR, being a motorsport heavily reliant on corporate funding, specifically Fortune 500 companies, had a lot of financial questions heading into the 2009 season specifically. Only 37 of the full-time teams had sponsorship for the entire season. Some of the notables struggling to put together a full season of sponsorship, like back in the old days, included DEI and Robert Yates, which if you go back to 2007 were 6th and 7th on the most valuable teams list. That led to the rise of the co-primary sponsorship model that Kyle Busch had on his car for the second and third seasons at Hendrick Motorsports. It became common with two of the most mainstream stars, Dale Earnhardt Jr. beginning in 2008 with National Guard and Amp Energy, then Tony Stewart when he moved away from Joe Gibbs Racing and went to Stewart-Haas Racing in 2009 with Office Depot and Old Spice. Other teams had a primary sponsor for a majority of the season, but also had a handful of other sponsors that weren't willing to commit as much as they once did, and those companies would fill out the 36 race season. Still, the Mars family's devotion to the NASCAR Cup Series, and specifically in the talent of Kyle Busch and the Joe Gibbs Racing team, it continued even as sponsors dropped like flies and driver salaries shrunk. Kyle Busch kept winning M&M's races, and that included 2 NASCAR Cup Series championships, 2 Brickyard 400s, and the Coca-Cola 600. Mars got their bang for their buck, and that meant that Kyle Busch got to enjoy the luxuries of being a NASCAR superstar. He was one of the most paid stars at that time, despite some of his PR nightmares. Moments where other sponsors would have said, hell no, we're not going to have a driver like Kyle Busch anymore. If he's going to bring this attention to our company, instead we're going to go sponsor a PC driver that is not going to get our company into trouble. Kyle Busch, with a company that understood his character, understood who he was, became one of the highest earning NASCAR drivers, earning 8 figures every year for the last 15 years. All of this as the NASCAR Cup Series spent the last decade scaling back its expenses to keep up with the new reality it found itself in. Track attendance has been abysmal for NASCAR standards, which included a new race between ISC and SMI, a tight race to tear down grandstands or add as many drink rails as humanly possible to try to make these places look more full. TV ratings have recovered a bit, but NASCAR is still a shell of the numbers it once put up. Most drivers and race teams today do not have a primary sponsor anymore. Those days are long gone. Instead, we have the anchor sponsor, which usually doesn't sponsor more than half the season. One of about 8 or 9 companies that gets these teams through the year financially, and that is something that has killed driver identity, as you're lucky if your driver runs the same livery for more than 3 weeks in a row. NASCAR is not what it once was. This was something talked about a crap ton in 2018 when Dale Jr. TM left, but that talk has surprisingly died down in a big way. And this is because either today's NASCAR journalists, they aren't asking the tough questions. We don't have guys like David Poole and Ben Blake in this motorsport anymore asking those tough questions, or this is all by design. You think about it, if NASCAR kept releasing attendance figures and the driver salaries, you would see that it's not anywhere close to its heyday. And guess what? That's going to mean that the journalists, they have something to talk about. It's going to mean more negative press. Potentially, that could mean less corporate sponsors wanting to invest in a motorsport that they see as dying out. Therefore, as a multi-billion-dollar business, it makes sense as to why NASCAR is trying to keep quiet. They're trying to close the doors because they know they are far from their former glory. Though it's stories like the one last December that reminds us all that NASCAR economically is losing the power it once wielded in the corporate world. M&M's, after 15 years of loyalty and success with Kyle Busch and Joe Gibbs Racing, announced their complete departure from NASCAR after the 2022 season, stating that they wanted to try other things out. And so far, that has included their number one priority, guys. This is their number one goal as a company, and that is to make their chocolate candy mascots more inclusive. Because in this generation, giving the red M&M an assertive and aggressive personality type might offend their consumers to the point where they stop buying Mars products completely. On another note, M&M's is actually kind of smart for leaving NASCAR. They saw the sport in decline. They saw that this was a motorsport that was not pulling the numbers it once was. And with all the success they've had with Kyle Busch, they will still get a lot of TV time during these races when NBC or Fox shows a replay of the Chicagoland Speedway slide job. Or, of course, they show the highlights from 2015 and 2019 where Kyle Busch was at the top of his game, winning championships with the M&M's colors. Now they're in a position where they can actually move that money to areas that have more people, more eyeballs glued to it, because obviously NASCAR is no longer what it once was. And that is more than likely the NFL, like other NASCAR defectors have in the past. Heck, not even a year after dumping Jimmy Johnson, Lowe's signed on to become the official home improvement partner of the NFL. Gee, I wonder where they just all of a sudden got the $1 million necessary to sign a deal with the NFL to become the official home improvement partner. It is remarkable how all of a sudden they just pulled that out of nowhere. In reality, the harsh reality of most sponsors leaving NASCAR is that they are shifting their spending towards avenues in other sports. They are not leaving the sports world completely. Sports, they are still a $1 billion industry. You know, there's still people that watch sporting events all across the US and all across the world. The problem is they are not watching NASCAR anymore, and we've seen a variety. They've kind of spread out to other sporting leagues. Heck, Great Clips even dumped Casey Kane to go sponsor Monster Jam. And unless you're a kid that consumes all the toys, or you just really love the thrill and the craziness of monster trucks, Monster Jam, you guys know damn well that it is not relevant in American culture anymore. It just isn't. And honestly, I hate to be downright negative on this video, but honestly, this could be the fate of NASCAR in a few decades with the rise of Formula One and Liberty Media's objective to capture the American market. Now, I know a lot of motorsports fans, they don't want to hear this. They don't want to see these two fight against each other, and rather, they want them to have a symbiotic relationship where they're all buddy-buddy. Hey, let's help each other out. Let's grow motorsports all together. They want that reality to happen, but I hate to be the bearer of bad news right here, but this is never going to happen. Not only are these two competing for the younger demographic in the United States, but they are also in a tug of war over who will influence the American motorsport culture for the next few decades. And I'm going to go ahead and say it right now, Formula One is downright crushing NASCAR. You may not see this on the surface as NASCAR still has higher TV ratings than Formula One, but you have to look at the demographics. More 18 to 29-year-old Americans are watching Formula One than NASCAR, which is downright scary because when you think about it, when the older fans, they eventually die off, and if NASCAR cannot find ways to get more younger people to watch, Formula One is going to be the new king of motorsport in the United States. F1 is going to be getting the American sponsorship dollars, and that could honestly include not only some former sponsors, but some current NASCAR sponsors right now sponsoring the likes of Hendrick and Joe Gibbs. They could decide, NASCAR, you know what, you're no longer good anymore. We're going to sponsor teams like Red Bull, Mercedes, and McLaren. And if that happens, guys, guess what? That's going to be even more of a decrease in sponsorship money, and guess what? That's going to mean even more of a decrease in driver salaries. And yes, I am going to hear it about how the Formula One grid, it is paper thin. There are only 20 entries, yet this could spiral into something bigger to where more aspiring drivers, they want to become Formula One drivers. Maybe they try to go through that, or they decide to go the IndyCar route, and that really rises the popularity of open wheel above things like stock car racing. And thus, it could create a narrative where all the talent is in open wheel racing. All the people want to be open wheel drivers, and that is going to put NASCAR into a situation where they don't have the best drivers. More companies see NASCAR as sports entertainment with cartoon characters as drivers rather than a legitimate racing series. Heck, if I'm being honest, we might be in that first stage right now, as NASCAR has openly crowned itself as sports entertainment with numerous changes over the years, making it seem more like a clown show. I know Barnum and Bailey shut down a few years ago, but with some of the decisions NASCAR has made, it seems like they are the new replacement to the circus. And honestly, this is why I wouldn't mind seeing NASCAR make less changes and instead kind of step back for a moment and think about, this situation with Kyle Busch, because this right here should be a massive wake-up call to the people in Daytona. One of the best drivers has to take a pay cut just to remain in the series. I'll reiterate that point. One of the top talents, a NASCAR Cup Series champion, the driver that has the most wins in the NASCAR Cup Series, has to take a pay cut. Just let that statement sink in. Could you imagine if none of the teams in the NFL could afford Tom Brady's salary? That would be headline news. It would be all across, major platforms, ESPN, Fox Sports would be talking about, oh, the NFL is dying. They're in a massive decline. And it's crazy to think because sports contracts today seem to be going down this route of being more and more record-breaking every single year. Heck, just look at Major League Baseball. The largest 10 contracts ever signed in Major League Baseball history were signed over the past 10 years. And keep in mind, baseball is a lot like NASCAR. It is a sport with record low attendance and has an aging fan base. Yet you still see players like Mike Trout, Juan Soto, Nolan Arenado, they're able to get millions of dollars. Whereas the NASCAR driver that's at the same level, at the top of his game, cannot get that type of salary anymore. And it's sad because when you look at things from a profession standpoint, NASCAR and professional auto racing, it is a tough skill to master. It is damn hard to be a NASCAR driver. Number one, you have to be in shape or at least be a bit bulky like Tony Stewart to drive some of these cars. You also have to have good reflexes to avoid some of the crashes and really good endurance to endure the 100-degree temperatures inside the cockpits of these race cars. It is not an easy task to be a NASCAR driver. It is something that requires you to be in a top mental state. Yet here we are, while the world tends to get more and more expensive, far from the days where a couple of quarters would fill up the tank for a week, NASCAR wages are stagnated where they should be at an all-time high. So I think the simple fix to this situation is the obvious, to bring back full-time sponsors, though NASCAR is not in that state. We don't see a high demand to sponsor a NASCAR Cup Series team. So if we aren't going to see the return of the likes of Target, Home Depot, Lowe's, and Miller Lite willing to spend millions for an entire season's worth of sponsorship, how does NASCAR compensate and make wages go up to the number that they should be? I think this is a topic that does not have a one-size-fits-all answer, as there are a couple alternatives, there are a couple solutions. Perhaps NASCAR could look to other sports such as the NFL, NBA, MLB, and the NHL, which rely less on outside sponsorship deals, and more on things such as attendance and merchandise sales to really pay their superstars. And this right here was something that NASCAR absolutely crushed in the glory days. They knew how to get merchandise on the shelves to represent their product. Heck, I went to a local supermarket one time. Keep in mind, this is not like Target or Walmart. A local supermarket, and they had NASCAR themed Beanie Babies right there. They had them for almost every single driver, even JJ Yeley. Well, guess what happened after that? The motorsport lowered its standard, and we do not see NASCAR have a big presence in the retail world. You don't go to Lowe's anymore during Christmas time to buy an ornament repping your favorite driver. When it comes to existing merchandise, you have uglier t-shirts and more expensive, yet at the same time lower quality die-cast from Lionel Racing. Plus, honestly, it seems like there's no value anymore in buying products, in this idea of consumerism, especially, when you think about it, a lot of the jobs, they've been moved from hardworking American people to sweatshops all the way in China. We all know that NASCAR has fallen when it comes to TV ratings and at the track attendance, as less money from ticket sales means less money in the drivers' pockets. So really, there's only one potential fix to get companies, specifically Fortune 500 companies, interested or reinterested in the NASCAR brand. And this is something that I preached hard in the Next Generation video, and that is the fact that NASCAR needs to let their personalities come out. NASCAR seems to believe in this idea that the series alone can draw in outside casual interest based on their big moves, such as racing the LA Coliseum and racing on the streets of Chicago like we will see next summer. The reality is that people are not going to be drawn into cars going in circles. We even saw that back in the mainstream NASCAR days. People were not drawn to rednecks driving in circles. They were drawn to the people driving those cars. And you guys might think that this is an idea out of style, but I beg to differ. As the Drive to Survive television show for Formula One, it made their drivers relatable to Generation Z in a big way, which I find fascinating because many of the Formula One drivers got their rise for being the sons of billionaires and politicians. The fact that Formula One got a generation in favor of economic distribution to watch and root for the sons of the 1% shows that NASCAR is not trying hard enough to get their drivers out there. Plus, it also shows that the vanilla stay-in-line approach to outspoken drivers that NASCAR has had over the past couple years is not the way for NASCAR to gain new fans. Maybe the USA docuseries can help with that, but that's just one piece of the puzzle. How can NASCAR get back to a point where corporate America wants to have their drivers star in commercials again? Yeah, you might have the occasional McDonald's commercial with Bubba Wallace in the Super Bowl, but honestly, when was the last time you really saw a NASCAR driver star in a commercial? Companies like Anheuser-Busch and Coca-Cola, they have a history of putting drivers in their ads. Yet, instead of seeing Kevin Harvick and Joey Logano in advertisements, we see the Busch guy and that one TikTok girl dancing to get a Coca-Cola. Meanwhile, that's not the case with Formula One, as last fall I learned a heck of a lot about Cash App and Bitcoin from Max Verstappen. These right here are questions that NASCAR needs to ask themselves long and hard, because if corporate America keeps looking past them, they will become Formula One, just not in a good way. With the children of drivers that raced in NASCAR's heyday, the next generation of drivers might lack the authentic stories and experiences that get the attention of companies, relegating the NASCAR driver to simply one that has a pre-established name, Brexton Busch, Kyle Busch's son included. In many ways, Kyle Busch's contract fight not only says a lot more about the state of NASCAR than originally meets the eye, but also the future of stock car racing going forward. So anyways, this is Nathan for NRF Productions signing out, and just remember guys and gals, life's a beach and then you drive.